I think this is probably going to be the most eye contact we've done.
I don't know if we've ever
ever
looked at each other this much.
This long.
Welcome to Shoulda Books, the podcast about all the books you should have read by now. My name is Jonathan, and today I am talking to video creator and live streamer Jack McGill. Jack and I worked at Try Guys for many years together. He still works there. He still appears in videos there, and his appearances, in my opinion, always make the video better. He's so funny, and he's also just so sincere. And you can see that in today's episode. We had a very deep conversation. I really enjoyed it. We talked about life and death and kind of the meaning of it all, which, fans of the podcast know I love talking about that stuff. So stick around. You're not going to be disappointed. Housekeeping. We are in February, which means it is Bronte month. We are reading Jane Eyre as part of the Shoulda Book Club, and the Wuthering Heights film by Emily Bronte. Well, it's by Emerald Fennell, but based on the book, you get it. It is coming out later this month, and I'm going to do something very fun for that. I'm not ready to announce what it is just yet, but mark my words, it's going to be great. So if you want to read along, head on over to Fable and find the Shoulda Book Club, Fable at Shoulda Books. And if you are interested in any of the books that we talk about today, there are going to be links in the description for all the books that we discuss. Those links are affiliate links to bookshop.org. Bookshop.org is a wonderful organization, website, entity that works with local bookstores. So when you buy books from there, you are supporting local bookstores. And if you buy from the links in the description, you're also supporting me because those are affiliate links and I get a very tiny commission. But hey, we do what we can to keep the lights on. And to that end, for the YouTube listeners, the lighting in here does look a little bit different because I don't have a whole lot of time. So I didn't get the whole setup going. So it looks a little bit different, but that's where we're at. So apologies to audio listeners, it means nothing to you. But without any further yabbering, is that even a word? I don't know. Anyway, please enjoy my conversation with YouTuber, live streamer, dancer. That's right, folks. He can dance, and I am not jealous. I'm not. His name is Jack McGill. Here's the episode. Let's hit the books. When was the last dancing you did?
Probably last year, I think. So it's been a little bit.
You're retired.
Not retired.
You need one last job.
Exactly. I need my badge back. But
well, we're not here to talk about dancing as much as you clearly want to. But no, we're here to talk about books.
Yes.
And first of all, thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem.
And
be here.
What do you read these days?
Not as much as I would like to. And I would say what's funny about coming on for this was that I actually spent like the week kind of revisiting these books that I'm talking about today. And I was like going to my local library and kind of like sitting down and like, doing the thing of like finding a nice sofa to sit on.
Oh,
and kind of, borderline performative male, kind of stance.
You had your matcha latte.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I had a Hosier vinyl just laying on the table. We were, but,
they're like, sir, you have to turn down the Claro. This is a library. You can't just be blasting Claro.
It's the first floor. Yeah. The second floors are the quiet ones.
Did you grow up reading a lot? Were you a reading boy?
Yeah, I definitely read a lot all throughout. I read in grade school. Okay. I read a lot. Mostly for assignments, but then also was really into graphic novels. You might call them picture books, if you will. But
okay. You can call them comic books.
No, I mean,
it's okay, Jack.
The material's different than the comic. The comic, books are on like a different material than the graphic novels. I think I was gravitating a lot towards graphic novels in high school, not because of my reading comprehension, but because I am insanely jealous of any like anyone with like an illustration or an animation skill, I am like so envious of. When I was in high school, it was like a lot of Bone. If you know Bone by chance,
I don't know Bone. What's Bone about?
It's funny that you asked that because I am blanking on the synopsis for Bone, but I did read it in high school. But then I read this was like right a few years after the movie came out. I was reading all the Scott Pilgrim graphic novels.
Oh yeah.
This is also when they were releasing the color prints. So I was reading it in black and white, and then they came out with the color prints, and I was like, well, I got to go back. I got to dip back in.
Honestly, that's such a brilliant business move.
Oh yeah.
Of just like, we're going to release black and white first.
Yes.
And then we'll charge them again for color.
It's like the Funko Popification of like of I guess, I don't know, written drawn media, where it's like, well, now this is a variant where it's, it's like, oh, now it's transparent. Now the hardcover is a little different. There's a different illustration on the front. So it's going to be a completely different experience. But I read a lot of Simpsons comics. I'll say those were comics. And a lot of Calvin and Hobbes.
He's on the record. Dude, Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah.
I absolutely adore Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah.
Man, I it's one of those things where like I have all the books at my parents' house, and maybe once every 3 years or so I somehow like come across them, and then it's just I'm sucked in.
Did you have like those big, like almost like compendiums?
I
like
had the ones
books
that would like hurt your foot if you dropped it.
Yeah, the large prints.
Yeah.
Those are the exact ones I'm talking about. Yeah.
Man, Calvin and Hobbes is great.
Yeah.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I do have a surprise for you.
Okay.
So,
my God.
There's a book for you wrapped
No
up.
way.
It's for our audio listeners. It's wrapped up in brown paper.
I love it.
It's written in, I will say, probably some of the best penmanship that's ever been committed to paper. It says to Jack.
It's a pretty good font. I will say it's better than I'll show like a little bit of my
Jack, that's your personal diary. Why don't dox yourself?
It's my notes for today. You can kind of see the Comic Sans font that I historically have sort of have written in the past.
That looks like my brother's handwriting.
Yeah.
That's really, actually, I'm going to need to see that up close afterwards.
Really?
But
okay.
Anyway, don't open it yet.
No. Sorry, we'll wait till the end.
He started to open it, and I swear to God, if you would open that, I would just immediately format the card.
Okay.
This episode would be over. No. So we'll come back in after you have told me all the books that you've brought.
Yes.
And we're going to see if I actually chose a book that you might actually be interested in.
Great.
So this is a book that I like, that I think you should read. But we're going to see if you agree at the end. But yeah, with that, you brought 3 books that you think everyone should read.
Yes.
So what's the first one?
Yeah. So I kind of realized as I was picking these that the kind of like, I don't know, the overall theme about all three of these books in a way is kind of like grief and death. And I was,
So it's going to be a fun episode.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good time.
Okay,
it's going to be a really, really good time. The backstory for this first one of mine is a recent find. It's Ask Iwata, which doesn't really, have an author per se, because it's a collection of articles from the president and CEO of Nintendo throughout the early and mid 2000s, Satoru Iwata. He was the guy who was kind of like the godfather of the Wii and the DS. He was kind of the brain master, if you will. But it's just a collection. It's a collection of interviews that he did throughout that time, where he kind of like talks about his life, and also like his words of wisdom to kind of like pass on to creatives, to even like people that are, I guess, like managers, like how to run a successful company. And what's really interesting about this is that Satoru Iwata passed away in 2015 from bile duct cancer. Ooh. And this book is kind of, I'll see if I can maybe show it a little bit to the front. This is actually a dedication from his former employees. So there's like a whole preface from his employees talking about like, we brought this together because we wanted to share his insights and actually have it in kind of like a printed format. So it doesn't get lost,
really cool.
on a website basically. Because this used to be, the segment of the Nintendo website that used to exist during this time was called Iwata Asks, where basically he would be interviewed about, I think I've already said this, but he would be interviewed about like kind of the new things going on Nintendo, but then also like how he's doing and his philosophies about, the company's vision and where they should go. And what really gravitated me towards this book was not just my love for, video games, but then also I've heard so many great things about him as a leader, as someone who who started out in the late 70s, early 80s as a programmer himself. And you kind of learn about his come up, if you will, his rise into his position where he started as a programmer and then started working for a company known as HAL Laboratory. You know them because they are
2001: Space Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. HAL. Yeah. That might be where the name is from, but really? I'm not going to throw.
Okay, yeah, I derailed you. I'm sorry.
That's up for debate.
Yeah. Okay.
But he worked for HAL Laboratory in the 80s, and they're known for the franchises we know, Kirby. So he was kind of one of the people behind the Kirby franchise. If you know that big. Pink orb, yeah. He actually became president of that company when he was 32, when they were 1.6 billion yen in debt. So he got his job as president of HAL Laboratory at the time because they were in debt and no one else wanted to take up the mantle.
Really? Wow. He was like, put me in, coach.
And yeah, he had said, I guess I'll just sort of take this on. And he actually was able to, get them out of that debt. And
how did he do that?
It was from the launch of the first Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land, on the Game Boy, which used to have a completely different title. I'm blanking on the name of the original title, but he was actually pitched on the title of Kirby from Shigeru Miyamoto, who was the creator of Mario and Zelda. He said, actually, drop just Kirby, kind of response. And then they sold 5 million copies of Kirby's Dream Land within the first, I think, year, if I'm not mistaken, and got that company out of debt. What's I think really overall, though, I think fascinating about his story is that like seeing his words and seeing him, kind of like talk about his process and also his like claim to fame is that he was an incredibly humble person that really was not in it for the profit. He was there's actually an excerpt. I have my own notes here in my My Neighbor Totoro journal.
The texture of Jack's notebook is very inviting. I just want to can I hold it?
It's a nice
for
felt.
A second?
Yeah, it's a nice felt material.
That's really nice. That's really nice.
Got it at the Play on the West End.
Oh, cool.
If you're in London, they probably have this online somewhere. But before, I guess I'm going a little bit out of order in his, autobiography in this. But he talked about early on in his career when he was making games for the Famicom, which turned out to be the Nintendo Entertainment System in the US, but before that was in Japan, known as the Family Computer. He actually made some of the launch titles for that system that went on to sell like millions and millions of copies. But he talks about how in that experience, he actually was not given royalties by Nintendo. The agreement from Nintendo was that he was, his company or his group was only getting commission on those games, but was really, I'll pull it up right now. Here we go. I'm jumping into the book.
We're jumping into the text.
What I found really interesting is that he talks about it and he doesn't talk about it with like any sort of malice. I'll go through the whole paragraph. They enlisted us to program software for their games. This was the start of my relationship with Nintendo. Some of the early Famicom releases, such as Pinball and Golf, were made by me and the folks at HAL. Making games for the Famicom was loads of fun, especially when they started selling like crazy all around the world. Since those games were designed on commission, we didn't benefit financially from the sales, but we were overjoyed that our games had become household names. These creations that once upon a time had only been known to the friends seated next to me had reached people all over the world. What could be cooler than that? And like the whole book is like with that same sort of like wholesomeness of like, this is a guy who talks about like programming games on his like TI-84 back in the 70s. And maybe it was a different calculator, but programming games on his calculator, and then going on to become the head of this major video games like corporation, but still having that like mindset. And like I think it's like it's one thing that he could be talking about himself, and it's like, oh well, maybe he's like kind of like tooting his own horn, and like, but the fact that this was compiled and brought together by all of his former employees. And I'll also read a passage from the preface. I feel like just goes to show that he was someone who really wanted to do right by the people that he worked for, and then the people that he worked with, and then that, the people that worked for him. It's a really, I think it's like, it's such a great read, given that I feel like nowadays, I feel like whenever I hear a major company in the news, it's usually for not great reasons.
I don't know what you're talking about. What could be better than making money?
Exactly. Number go up.
Furthering income inequality.
Big number got to go up. Big number got to go up. And it's such a great like kind of. I hope it doesn't stay as a time capsule of like, this period. I hope that this is something that even like Nintendo, comes back to. But from the preface in this book written by, Iwata's employees, totally, heartbreaking. They said, Iwata, our dear friend, sometimes we find ourselves wanting to call out your name. Aww. It seems that any day you might crack open the office door. It seems like any day you might crack open the office door wearing that grin of yours. It's devastating to consider that we'll never be able to catch up with you again. Every page of this book is suffused with Iwata's thinking and philosophy. His words continue to steel our resolve, showing us how to live an honest life. May the words of Satoru Iwata continue to reach new audiences for years to come. And I remember reading that, and that just like absolutely hitting me like a brick. Like I can't really, I can't really fathom,
I can fathom writing that while your boss is still your boss and still alive. But the fact that they wrote that
years
afterwards shows the impact that he had.
And the whole back half of this book is also just excerpts from all of his collaborators like Miyamoto, talking about their experiences with him and like the words that he shared. And overall, it's a really great, a really great book about how to, just be, respectful and respect the people that you work with, and like, make sure that like, when you're making things that, that you aren't, trying to tackle a metric per se, or a number or like a sales number. But like, he talks about in this book with making the Wii and the DS, you have to make something that shocks people that, at first they will, kind of say like, oh, that's kind of crazy that you're thinking of that. But then like you look at the actual sales numbers after the fact of the Wii and the DS, and they went on to become some of the best selling consoles of all time, selling hundreds of millions of units. And you also get, if you're interested in learning about, I guess, video games as well, there is a lot of behind the scenes about like how they went about their philosophy of making both of those systems. And like little things where it was like both of them were like perfect, kind of like perfect timing with both of their releases, where they were talking about, even with the Wii, they're like, this is a very, active system where you're standing up and you're swinging, the Wii remote. But what's so nice is that like, everyone now is like selling their CRTs and getting LCDs, and that makes for more space in the living room. So like, this is the perfect system to come out right now because people are getting more space to move and be active. And there's a lot of talking about how they try to make a system or a handheld and a console that really spoke to everybody. You can read. I mean, goes to show, that with the DS, there's even a Beyonce ad. They have there was a game. I'm blanking on the name of the game right now. That it wasn't a game. It was straight up just a book, or it was a game where you could read royalty free, like public domain, like classic books. On the DS.
Interesting, you say.
That's what I'm saying. That's how it ties in. That's the full circle. Beyonce's in the ad, and she has the DS tilted sideways, and she's reading it with a stylus to flip the pages. It was like, I believe it predates the Kindle.
Interesting. Yeah.
It was like the first.
The stylus was really a thing.
Yes.
Around that time.
I mean, this was PDA, PDA city.
Yeah. Did you ever have a PDA?
My dad did, and I had fun playing with it before we were getting, seated at Chili's. That was kind of, it was that and like in his BlackBerry, which I then actually got as a hand-me-down when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And what's funny is that you don't think a kid would be entertained by a BlackBerry. Again, predates smartphones and predates a lot of tech, but playing, the keyboard was great for my tiny little hands, which have not grown since. And also the trackball was such a blast for Brick Breaker. I used to play Brick Breaker all the time on my little BlackBerry.
Wow.
And then they changed it to like a little touchpad, and then that ruined the whole experience. And now BlackBerry is just a cybersecurity company.
They fumbled the bag.
Yep. Yeah, they dropped it.
Yeah.
And this book explains why.
This is really interesting. So, how did you come across this book? Was it just because you're a Nintendo fan and it was just kind of in the ether?
Yeah, it was. I think it was something where I don't have a Goodreads ananymore, but when I had a Goodreads, it was under. I think I was looking into grabbing a copy of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow.
Oh, okay. I've been wanting to read that.
And I think it was under the recommended books that were on the Goodreads website. And then I was in Boulder with a friend and we were on Pearl Street. And we walked into this bookstore, and then I was like, oh, we're in this bookstore. I remember seeing this book that I thought was interesting. Let me see if I can find like a hard copy of it. And then I, sure enough, found it. Yep. I'm just making sure. Yeah. Boulder bookstore.
That's cool.
And then I found it there, picked it up, and then just read it from there. That was probably about 2-3 years ago.
Okay.
And it's history ever since, just,
I'm always so fascinated in like what's going on in someone's life when they're reading a book.
Yeah.
So like what was kind of, or was there anything that was going on in your life when you found that book that like, was synchronous in some sort of way that like, contributed to like, oh, this was a book that I needed to read right now.
Yeah. I think, what's interesting about like kind of all three of these books today, and like how a lot of like, so when it comes to me just reading, straight up books, not just graphic novels or comics or anything like that. But what I really gravitate towards with books is that like, sometimes I just need, not necessarily like escapism, but like I need to kind of get pulled out of the tunnel vision of my life a little bit, and just kind of, really get like the foundation again of what I want my life to be about, and what I value, and what I should try to pursue. I think this was like a book that came up, and I was like, oh, I would really want to read that, because I feel like right now, I'm in my mid-20s, I'm still kind of throwing darts at the board. And I do feel like maybe I need that kind of like refocus or reframing to kind of get into a place that, I can feel like, okay, now I feel like I'm making progress with what I really want to do and what I really want to, set out to become, whether it's in my career or life, et cetera, et cetera. And what's funny is that, I was reading this in the past week or revisiting this, and I like had that same exact moment where I was like, oh, it's not about all of, it's not about all this stuff that I've been really sort of worried and anxious about. Like, this is what I should be really focusing on. And this is what I should really just, keep in contact with the people around me, and text and call more, and just like actually even though I would say that I'm not bad per se at valuing my personal relationships. Hey. You know, it like all three of these books really are like a way to like say like, oh, this is what it's about.
This is what it's about.
And not, you know, I think getting wrapped up in the, you know, day-to-day sort of monotony, minutia, that sort of thing.
What are some of those things that you value and that you want your life to be about? And how did this book kind of speak to that?
Good question. Let's see.
Making money.
Preface. Yeah, exactly.
Destroying
Doing
your
the
enemies.
grind.
It's all about the grind
It's
set.
all about the grind set mindset. Getting those sponsors. No, I you know, I'll preface this disclaimer for future me. This is me at 27. We'll see what happens when I'm 33 or something. Yeah. But I think right now, it really is just about really taking a breath. I feel like I so naturally want to be, you know, hyperactive and do a million things at once and try to see what I can accomplish as efficiently and as quickly as possible. And I think, you know, when I come back to this, it's like, no, you know, like you should be, you know, where's the fun? It's like right now you're just checking off lists and you're, you know, getting responsibilities done and you're just sort of like, you know, walking through your days and not really like actually taking a second to observe and be, you know, try to find more of a balance between being like a doer and a learner and not, just trying to throw yourself in a million places at once just because, you know, time not spent is time wasted or something like that. I think it's just like,
it's
no.
hard to divorce yourself from that mentality because it's so just ingrained. And it's just like, I have to be productive every single moment of the day. I mean, I'm so guilty of that. So
I had a real obsession in like 2021, 2022 of like productivity hacking. I was like, I was looking up all these YouTubers that were like, you know, recommending productivity tools and building your, I think the concept is the second brain. I think it is where it's like, exactly. Where it's just like, okay, so I'll put my, you know, I'll write down my notes here and then I'll put this in my Evernote notebook and then I'll scan the QR code and then put that into Evernote. And then I can actually put that later into a Notion tab and automate the process. And like basically thinking of like this whole pipeline of like, oh, I need to be every time like an idea comes out, like it needs to be recorded and it needs to be organized and I need to like, it's almost like what's the like I need to create like whatever the SEO is of my life and like and you know, categorize everything. Yeah, exactly. And then like I had to kind of stop myself and be like, you know what? Maybe it's okay to have a disorganized notes app and just kind of like let the spiels be spiels and not try to as you can tell, I was diagnosed with OCD around this time, and there is some parallel there. But I did, and I still, you know, I'm kind of like working through it, you know, throughout my life of trying not to be so obsessive compulsive and think like, no, you are not a machine, you are a person, and you don't have to automate anything. Stop trying to automate everything.
Right.
You know, it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And that's like kind of, you know, something I've, wanted to, I don't know, put into whatever like my future work might be. I've been interested in kind of like getting into more, I think, kind of doc/vlog style, you know, work on my own personal channels and things like that. And I feel like that's, you know, something that I want to kind of explore. But it also, you know, now that I'm kind of going on all these tangents, it's like, oh, this makes sense that you have Marcel the Shell with shoes on as your poster in your you know, in your apartment. Because it's like, that movie is like, I don't know. I feel like it covers all of those bases so much.
Just slowing down, taking a breath.
Yes.
And not being addicted to productivity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yes, exactly. You're getting it. Yeah,
exactly.
And now we're going to 2x speed everything. And if I watch YouTube at 2x speed, then I'll get the information at half the time used. And that means I'm actually using my time better. And then I'll actually, yada, yada, yada. Yes.
In the spirit of taking a breath, I'm gonna turn the damn AC on.
Yeah, sounds good.
Are you like burning up?
I'm used to this with my streaming where I forget to turn the AC on, and then
the sound quality might suffer, but you know what? I care about.
It's okay. My
guests.
You can EQ it. Throw it into RX6, RX7. Isotope.
So, we're still figuring things out here in the in the dining room studio. I just moved into this place, and lots of fun quirks, like the fact that the thermostat is in Celsius.
That's fun.
So, do you know what 22 degrees Celsius is? Is that?
No, I do not.
I don't either.
I don't know what the math is for Fahrenheit.
I don't. I wish I could be the sort of person who fucked with Celsius.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, just a dumb American.
When I was in London a couple weeks ago, someone was like, it's pretty, it's looking pretty bad. It's going to be, yada, yada.
It's going to be like 22 out there.
And then being like, yeah, man, but not
like,
actually,
yeah.
oh, that's crazy. And
That's
not really
crazy.
knowing what that, kind of, entailed. I mean, in high school, all of my science teachers were like, we should have, gone to metric. I don't know why we had the imperial system. And
yeah, look, they're not wrong.
Yeah.
They're not wrong, but it's the ship has kind of sailed at this point.
Exactly.
It's, I'm not changing. Also,
it's freedom units,
freedom
that we have
units,
now here in the States.
And we're gonna get into kind of your kind of weird political
exactly.
thoughts and stuff.
Yeah.
But before that, what's your next book?
Okay, these are kind of a combo package because I'll actually give the backstory to these because they came to me as a combo package. It was 2015. Okay. 2016. I was, not to make anyone feel bad here.
I'm the only person in the room, Jack.
I was a senior in high school.
Okay. All right. 2015.
2015.
Okay.
And what was really interesting about the English class that I took that year was, it was, usually in our curriculum, freshman, sophomore, junior, everyone's reading the same books at the same time. We're all having the same discussions.
Yeah.
And then I believe it was the spring, and we're getting to the end of the year. And then my teacher kind of comes out and says, actually, for this last book that you'll be reading in high school, I'm actually going to break you off into 5 or 6 different groups. Oh. And you're not going to, I guess I'm not going to break you off myself. I'm actually going to lay out 6 different books, and everyone that wants to, go to X, Y, and Z book, you can just go into that group and be a part of that group. So I think the books were 1984,
okay,
which I'd already read junior year. So I was like, get that out of here. Yeah. Quick tangent about 1984. Okay. Really funny, It was such an Obama era class because I remember in 1980. I remember in 1984. No, I remember people reading 1984 and being like, "Yeah, text messaging. That's kind of like newspeak, right? LOL. That's exactly what Orwell was predicting, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, now looking retrospectively, it's like, wow, what a time.
Yeah, we kind of missed some of the more important aspects. I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny.
That was always the thing that my teachers wanted to push was like, TTYL. That's exactly what George Orwell was thinking we were headed.
It's so funny. My first year of college, English 101, I wrote an essay literally about that. You were 2 at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was about how using CU for meaning CU was degrading our language.
Yeah, we're dumbing ourselves down with this.
And it was just it's so cute now. It's so cute. But
in the era of brain rot,
we got 1984,
Brave New World. All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh, Jesus.
I know, right? Yeah. These were Night. Really intense reads.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I'd already read this freshman year. Speak was, I think, number 5.
Oh, okay.
And then 6, what's funny, I think I jumped into this one. 6 was both of these books. And the reason why it was 2 books in one group was because they were the shorter books. So it was, instead of Shoulda Books, it's Shorta Books.
Shorta Books, yeah, the new spinoff series.
And I think I originally gravitated toward these books, I think because the freeloader and me were like, oh, shorter reads. I'll take those any day over one long book. And so I sat down and I brought these, and I got the books, and the 2 books, I'll introduce both of them at the same time and then go one by one.
Okay.
Were Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom, and then The Last Lecture by Randy Posh. And I think before even going about like the synopsis of this, what's really, fascinating looking back at that time of my life and how the reason why I think these books are here is that in a way, these books were kind of my introduction to grief itself. When I was, however many years old, 17, 18, I was at a period in my life. Exactly. Last year. First vote this year, go Prop 50. This was at a time in my life where, I still had everyone, important to me in my life. And, the greatest sort of grief I had felt at that point was my first dog passing away in middle school. And and reading these books, they both deal with terminal illness, and they deal with really having to sort of face death head on, and having to actually there's no other time but now to really process this because it's happening right now. And it's very interesting to look back at, because I think all of us in that group were in very similar places where we, all of us still had our grandparents, and when we came to meet with each other every other day, I think it was, when we broke off into the groups.
You didn't do it on Tuesdays?
No, not on Tuesdays. I think it was maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay. I think we all were kind of going through our similar feelings with these books of like, wow, I don't think I've ever really felt grief like this in my own life. And I feel like I'm feeling it so intensely right now reading this, but also these are like great books to read about grief, because they really look at death with a much more optimistic lens than, I think, I feel like a lot of the books that dealt with death that other people were reading, we're kind of like discussing. And I guess I'll go into it. I'll start with Tuesdays with Morrie, Mitch Albom. This was released in 1997, I believe. Okay. TV movie came out in 1999. Oh, wow. It's co-starring. Mitch was played by Hank Azaria. Oh. And Morrie was played by Jack Lemmon. So, pretty interesting cast. Interesting. Executively produced by Oprah. I think this was probably on Oprah's book list at some point. Makes sense, yeah. This thing lived on the New York bestsellers list for ages. Ages. I will say as an aside, it was interesting to read up about Mitch Albom after this, because then I was reading up that all the reviews for this were interesting to read, because it seems like nowadays this book kind of splits people down the middle, where you have people like me that are still kind of profoundly affected by it, and then you have other people that are like, oh, this just feels like I'm reading Hallmark card quotes. Oh, interesting. Okay. And a lot of people also being like, yeah, I met, Mitch Albom. He really sucks. A lot of people in like forum threads, and I don't know.
There's a lot of ways to suck. What are they saying about him?
I forgot what Detroit newspaper he wrote for, but there was a big news strike in the, I think, mid to late 2000s. Okay. He did cross the picket line. Oh, he's a scab. Yes. Yeah. So,
next book.
Yeah. But, you can include that if you like to, but, I think, kind of taking that part, that happened after this book, so it's fine. Okay. Yeah.
So but, he didn't learn anything from his own book.
Which is very interesting to go back into this book, because he talks about, basically the synopsis of this book is that it's a memoir. It's both an autobiography and a biography. And it's about him going to Brandeis University and his relationship with his sociology professor, Morrie Schwartz, and them kind of like having like almost like a friendship when he was in school. And, it's kind of like it goes between this moment in his life where he was in his like early 20s and at Brandeis University and getting to know Morrie. And then the present day in this book when he was more in his 30s and kind of broke off from sociology and pursued a career in sports journalism, became like a sports commentator. And he talks about, he admits in his book that like he spent a lot of his 20s and his 30s really only chasing the money and really chasing where that was going and chasing status and trying to be a big name in sports journalism and like being like, okay, I need to get the big house. I need to get the big car. You know, I need to have all this stuff. And then the book really kind of kicks into gear when he's watching Nightline on TV, and then he sees a newscast where his old professor Morrie Schwartz is being interviewed by Nightline, and it turns out that Morrie has been diagnosed with ALS, and he is going through ALS and has less than, I believe, a year to live, and kind of basically he finds this newscast live on TV when it happens. And he's like, oh, I need to go back and see this old professor, a friend of mine. So he flies to, he flies over to where Morrie lives. And the book title comes in where actually they meet up every Tuesday and sort of discuss life, and they discuss like what it means to actually be alive and living, and how to think about death and how to perceive death. And what's really great about Morrie in this book is that like he basically says, I've got a passage for you. I've got an excerpt.
Transcribed.
There's two excerpts I have. Okay. If everyone go to page 10, he I guess says about himself, he would not wither. He would not be ashamed of dying. He was intent on proving that the word dying was not synonymous with useless. And I think like what's interesting about, his perspective on it is that like, he's losing all of the functions in his body, and it's like going up from his feet all the way up to his shoulders and head. And he's losing, the ability to be a self-sustaining person. Yeah. But what's really, interesting is that he goes, actually, I'm not going to, just kind of wallow in it. I'm going to take this time to catch up with all of the people in my life, and also try to kind of immortalize myself by sharing my experiences in my life, and talk about those experiences and talk about what I am taking away from this experience. So the book is basically like they're meeting every Tuesday, as Morrie's unfortunately deteriorating. Right. But Mitch comes in with a tape recorder and goes, I want to record all these conversations because I want to like have these to look back on. But then also I just want to like keep hearing your voice. And like, it's just a very, touching story. I think there is also a play adaptation that people say is absolutely heartbreaking. And this does read like a play. I think I would love to read the play for it and also like see the production. Yeah. It was fascinating, but it was also like, here's this like train that is like barreling towards, this brick wall, and there's like no way of stopping it. But at the same time, like, it feels like, there's no need to like panic. And, I would say if this book is almost like a sociopath test, because I feel like if you don't read this and have a moment of like some tears forming, I was reading this in the library, and like, I was like, I need a second. I need to, contain myself. You had to
turn down the Claro.
Emotions got to go down. Yeah, exactly. Got to put the vinyl away. It's a very, introspective read. Yeah. That really just sort of, again, sort of like puts things into sort of perspective of like, I need to focus on my close relationships, and I need to make sure that I value them. And I also let the people around me know that I value them. And it's a great, it's a quick read because like I mentioned, this was a combo read.
Yeah.
Both these books were put together. Yeah. I guess I won't, go through the whole, beginning, middle, and end, because then why read it? But,
right.
it's overall a book that really, moved me at the time, moved me again when I reread it for this podcast.
Yeah.
And it's why it's on this list.
Yeah, I want to read it. I really do. I see the subtitle. Subtitle, is that what you're called?
An old man, a young man, and life's greatest lesson.
Life's greatest lesson. Yeah, I saw that and I was like, okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's a little okay.
I'm telling you.
But
people,
hearing you talk about it, it's like that is life's greatest lesson, because it is. We're dying.
Yes,
we are. Right, you and I right now in this room in 22 degrees Celsius.
Uh-oh.
I actually, there actually is cyanide in the sparkling water you're drinking. No,
third time this week.
Yeah, not again.
No, wow, shucks.
But yeah, it's the most like fundamental fact of our existence, and and because it's so terrifying, it's just so easy to just forget about it and just act like it's not happening.
Yes,
I'm super curious to read this because like I don't know what you were taught about death growing up, but like for me it's inextricably linked with religion, and so it created this just like fundamental like terror and panic about the idea of death, and it it lingers for me, like I'll say it. I'm scared of dying.
Yeah. Same.
So,
I mean, that's, a lot of my anxieties stem from that exact thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of sociopath tests, it's like, if you say you're not scared of dying, like, come on, dude. Everyone's scared of dying, but it was a long time before I could even kind of like even think about the idea of dying without like being just filled with panic, and terror, because it was one of those things where I was like, okay, intellectually, I don't believe that this is happening, but emotionally it's still there, and it's still, there's still like a kind of residual residue, a remnant of that feeling, so I'm really curious, like, what what are some of those lessons about the fear with dying that are discussed in this book? Yeah,
I mean, on the note of religion, Morrie's Jewish, but I, if I'm not mistaken, there's not that many references to like to Judaism or like sort of the afterlife in that context throughout the book, which is also interesting, because it feels like it's almost like, okay, let's like let's just get to the brass tacks. Let's not I mean, a lot of it, unfortunately, is the spoiler alert, is already the is a lot of, I guess, the things that I have sort of like mentioned, where it's really just a lot about like making sure that when you're when you're talking to people and people are talking back to you, just making sure that you're both actually listening to each other and like really again really ties into, I think, the overall thesis of like taking a breath and just sort of letting yourself have, the space to, exist and not just try to, storm your way through a difficult situation or storm through an uncomfortable conversation, but really trying to see people at their playing field, I guess, is maybe the expression I'm looking for.
Being present for people.
Yes.
Like
and that kind of just feels like, what a lot of the book really sort of just kind of hammers home over and over again. There's a very interesting sequence where Morrie, I think, is like, I don't know if he was like watching something or if there was a moment, there's a reference to a funeral at some point, and then Morrie's response to, remembering, funeral services, is to actually host a living funeral where
okay,
he's like, okay, I am dying. This is something that is happening.
Yeah.
I actually want to take this opportunity to actually be grateful that I know that this is happening right now.
Yeah.
And that I get this moment for, of course, I think he jokes about like, people can say like niceties about me, but more so that I get to be reciprocal in that and actually have this time to be able to share that with people and share with them, how I have, felt about them and what they mean to me in my life.
Yeah.
And I would say the other main point is, about the book is also trying to find the humor in like everything you can, not exactly trying to be like me where you try to, attempt to be funny at every moment, there's always got to be a bit, but there's always got to be a joke, but more so of like when he's talking to even like Nightline, I think like the correspondence, like, so, like, how do you feel about your like, body sort of breaking down essentially. And Morrie, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in this moment of the book, and this is like kind of the almost the inciting incident kind of quote, is that like he leans forward to the camera and he goes, well, I realize at some point someone's going to have to wipe my ass. So I'm kind of just coming to terms with that. And it really is just like, just looking at this, this terrifying thing that I, even after reading this, death, terrifying as hell, but trying to, not let it consume your life and letting it consume the fact that you're living right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, it also goes to show like how much strength he had in his last few months, given that he was dealing with such a terrible disease. And even in the midst of that was still like, I am grateful that I'm still here and I get to be around people and I get to be present.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really kind of like, again, puts things into perspective, and it's like, okay, things could be vastly different right now.
Sure.
And things could change in an instant. And if they do, what am I going to think about when I go back and reminisce about this present time? It's like, this is coming out of like a weird left field in my brain.
Go for it.
There was an Osmond that died.
There was an Osmond.
I'm blanking on which Osmond family member it was.
I'm the wrong person to ask. Like
I was so off. It was not an Osmond.
Folks, it wasn't an Osmond. It was not an... What was it?
Who was it? It was David Cassidy, who was starred in the Partridge Family. He passed away in 2017 at the age of 67.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
Okay. All right.
He passed away at the age of 67. And his last words were, so much wasted time. And it just like,
Jesus
I remember reading
Christ.
that, and I was, at this point in college, not to again date myself, but seeing that in college and just being like, again, feel like I was just hit at like 1,000,000 miles per hour. Really, So I think like, that was, I feel like another like kind of like stark reminder. But, I will then take that to then transition into my final book, which I don't have on hard copy. Couldn't lock it down in the library.
Okay.
So I have it on my Kobo Libra Color, which is a color e-paper e-reader.
I've never heard of this.
So
tell me about it.
Kobo is essentially a competitor to Kindle. And it's like, good. You've had your Kindle. Now do you really want to read on an e-reader? Get the Kobo. Okay. So also, if you prefer not to support Amazon, you go with the Kobo. This is a color e-paper e-reader. Oh, wow. You can see the color there. It's not the best. Go for it. I have the brightness cranked right now.
So he's got the brightness cranked right now.
But the last book that I have on this guy right here is The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch, which the synopsis is that Randy Pausch was a computer science professor at Carnegie Mellon University.
Nerd.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting that you say that.
I'm gonna feel really bad in about 30 seconds, aren't I?
Well, this is a memoir, and it's from the mid 2000s, 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
He was a comp sci professor at Carnegie Mellon and was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer.
Oh, Jesus.
So this book is basically about how he goes about doing what is called his last lecture at Carnegie Mellon, which a lot of the tradition, at the very least at Carnegie Mellon, is that all of the professors, when they're like retiring and moving on to other or going to another school or whatever their prospects are after Carnegie Mellon, they will famously, they all come out and do their last lecture, which is like their big what is this all about? He does his last lecture in late 2007, passes away in mid 2008. What's really fascinating about this one compared to Tuesdays with Morrie is that this one actually has kind of like a companion piece with it in that you can actually watch the last lecture on YouTube. It's in its entirety.
Oh, wow.
It was fully recorded at Carnegie Mellon. And that was mostly of what I revisited the book, which is kind of about what he's going to put in it. And then this is almost like a written adaptation of that lecture. Oh, wow. And you can watch it on YouTube. It's about an hour and 20 minutes. Okay. And I was saying it's funny that you said nerd because when you watch it, and I think he would agree with this, was that he is like totally like a nerd's nerd. He is like a very nerdy guy. And it's actually kind of a very funny lecture, which is interesting. He doesn't talk about his illness. He doesn't talk about his only reference to his pancreatic cancer. And I think it's at this point when he gives the lectures that it's already like, public news that like he has this terminal illness. Yeah. Is that like he mentions in the very beginning, like, oh, I have this terminal illness. I only have like 6 to 8 months to live. But right now I'm feeling really good. And he I think he does push-ups or something like that with like clapping his hands to show everyone he's like, he's in a good place. And he's like, so like, I feel like, I'm probably a little bit more fit than some people in this room. And like, from there on out, the whole lecture is basically, it almost feels like a stand-up routine. Oh, wow. And he doesn't talk about, he doesn't really go into depth about his diagnosis and that sort of thing. The only thing that the lecture is about, and it kind of is somewhat similar to what Morrie talks about in Tuesdays with Morrie, is the lecture was titled Realizing Your Childhood Dreams. So he goes through all of the childhood dreams that he had and goes one by one and talks about how he realized those childhood dreams and got to do the things that he had always wanted to do. It's filled to the brim with jokes. He is like nonstop joking. He's smiling the whole time. You would not know, watching it without any context, you would not know that this is someone that is like going through the last few months of their life and they know it. Wow. It's really moving. I saw a YouTube comment that I thought was really, profound. And someone had said like, this is actually something I come back to like every holiday season, every Christmas. I'll actually come back to this because it helps me kind of, reframe for the next year and like, and kind of reset, and lots of people that watch it to this day and like go like, this really keeps moving me. And I feel like I'm still learning things watching this year after year as I'm going through my own life experiences. And it's a really, entertaining watch. He goes through his career. He worked with like Disney Imagineering. I don't know if you ever heard of, or if you know Disney Quest, but Disney used to have at Disney World, this like indoor virtual reality park. And this is virtual reality from like the 90s and 2000s. So instead of like your little like Oculus Rifts from nowadays, these are like huge headsets that are like tethered at the top. And there's like, it's a virtual reality theme park where you go on like Pirates of the Caribbean and you sit in a little raft and like there's a projection screen around you. Or there's the Aladdin ride where you put on the VR headset and then now you're in Agrabah and you're on the magic carpet and you're flying around. He actually helped lead the I guess the technology on that project, and got to work with Imagineering, which is something that he always wanted to do. He talks about his pursuit to experience zero G's at some point in his life.
Oh wow!
And talks about that process. Again, at a time where I think those zero gravity airplane rides you can take were less like available for consumers or regular people. It was like locked off to just like students.
It was like NASA and the Today Show. Those were like the only
two at the time. And that's exactly his like the thing that he has to try to weasel around. And he talks about that, and just talks about all of his pursuits and what he's learned. It's a great story about like perseverance. He talks about he uses like a metaphor of like a brick wall, and he's like, there were so many times I got rejected to work with Disney, and he was like, well, a lot of times brick walls are there in your life to show you, to test you on how much you really want something, how much you really want to actually pursue it. Yeah. And he talks about overcoming those brick walls, and overall just a really, of course, very, very, there are some very heartbreaking moments in it. Yeah. Not in the lecture itself, but just in the book. And, but I do highly recommend if you're not able to find a copy, I think when I read up on it, when it first came out, it was so popular that it was selling out in stores. So you actually could not find a hard copy in like the late 2000s. But a free watch is literally just to watch it on YouTube. Yeah, it's really great. I watched it to its entirety just last night before I went to bed. I was like, I'm gonna just do a little screening for myself. Yeah. And I just highly recommend for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, what are some things from these books that you want to leave with people?
I'm going to see if I can come up with new points, but I feel like
I've actually already said everything.
I've said everything. Thanks everyone. Have a good one.
Like and subscribe.
Toodles, TTYL. I would say, I don't know if these are the best reads if you are currently going through grief in your own personal life. Sure. I don't know if it might be too triggering. Yeah. So I do give that sort of like disclaimer, but I will say, like, if you need something to kind of like, give yourself sort of inspiration, and also to kind of give yourself a bit of a mental reset in your life, these are all three great reads to kind of provide that sort of experience and feeling of like, like shut out all the noise. Like, let's like put everything outside and then bring things inside, to my world that like actually, means something to me legitimately, and not just things that feel like obligations, for the sake of it, or just because I'm trying to, do this. So I heard that you have to do this if you want to get there. Right. So I guess I have to do that. And then if I do this, especially people like me, if you have, generalized anxiety or like OCD, like it's almost a great way to kind of step away from those obsessions and, just say like, oh, like, it's good to have hobbies. It's good to have things that you're passionate about, but like, let's not like have it consume you to the point where you're lost in your studies while, the world is kind of like going by. And
this is your life.
Yes.
Your life doesn't exist somewhere else. This is it.
Yeah. And your life is it should be most important to you. So like, make sure to like, remember that, and like to, I say like, hold yourself accountable in terms of actually living your own life and not just existing in it. I think right now in my head, I'm just thinking back to that reference to those forum posts about like trying not to make a Hallmark card quote, but actually trying to be authentic and say like, no, this is actually something that I think is like important. And it's also like, so some of the things that you'll read do feel more obvious than other things, but I feel like it's all valuable. Yeah. And we just need, I think all of us just kind of need reminders.
Yeah. Look both ways before crossing the street is banal. It's simple.
My
it's
drive
obvious,
to get here,
but the thing is,
this
like,
morning,
it's really fucking important.
Yeah,
like you should do it.
My drive this morning, a lot of people were not looking both ways.
Oh man,
on my drive through your neighborhood.
Oh gosh, this neighborhood, I won't say where it is, but yeah, but the pedestrians around here.
They are, yeah.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for bringing these books in.
Yeah.
And I want you to open
No way.
this book.
My Nardwuar moment.
Your Nardwuar. And I will say, thematically, might not be the best match, but we're going to... It's
Mad Libs.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's the Da Vinci Code.
Great.
It is the Da Vinci Code. No, it is. This is a book called Bad Thoughts
Stories
by Nada Alec. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly.
Yeah.
Nada Alec. But it's a collection of short stories that I really, really enjoyed. She's an LA author. A lot of these stories are set in LA. I think it's just so well observed in terms of like the everyday moments, that make up our life,
Yes.
that we tend to skip over. She really zooms in on them.
This is a good match. What are you talking about? Yeah, I was like, no, I mean,
I'm selling. I'm trying to,
the morbidity doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
You don't need to always be facing, to have life observations. You don't need to be faced with death all the time. But But no, this is so nice. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Wow, this is great.
Yeah. In between the stories, there's like these little, basically tweets. She just has these like little bad
Blurbs.
thoughts that are just really funny and just really make me smile. But
that's so good. I'll need to keep you updated on my thoughts. I'll go back to the library this week and give it a read.
Hell yeah.
Ooh, and the font's nice and big.
It's a nice sans serif.
Yeah.
No, excuse me. It's serifed. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
It's got serifs on there. Sorry. No, thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you all for listening and watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, rate. I mean, it's 2025. It's probably actually 2026. It was 2025 when we recorded this, full disclosure. But you know what to do with a podcast. Anyway, thank you all, and thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
And most importantly, everyone, keep reading.